Hi, I'm Gina, and today's lesson is going to be creating a watercolor apple using watercolor pencils. This is a really exciting lesson, and we're going to learn some different techniques for blending and shading and keeping that form of the apple. We'll talk about how we'll use our different values system in order to have the lights, the darks, the highlights, in order to get that roundedness of the apple. And we'll be coloring it in and adding some water to it. So this is a great lesson. I'm very excited. Here's another final product that I did. So you can see that not all of these are going to come out exactly the same. I actually did this project a couple times before I really loved what I did. So practice makes perfect. So not that that's perfect. So I'm going to come back here and show you just a simple way of transferring an image to your paper. And I like doing this because we don't always have access to, you could do the same thing with carbon paper, but if I put carbon paper under here, sometimes you can get that smudginess all around, and we don't really need that much of an image. So I've created this template just using a copy. You can see I've used the template. I've used the template already, and I can just go back and use it again. I'm going to scribble a little bit more over. Might not even have to do this. There might be enough graphite on here already. But I'm adding graphite just with a simple number 2 pencil. And then I will turn it over, get it where I want it on my paper. And then I can just go ahead and trace my lines. You can see I've done this a few times. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's just basically a guide. And this is a great technique if you find something that you want to draw or you want to paint and you don't want the frustration of trying to recreate the image. Great image transfer technique. Very inexpensive. I'm going to trace around my apple. And you'll notice that I have some little kind of marks here. This is just a reminder to myself that there are some little areas here that I do want to retain the whiteness of the paper, because we'll find that when we're doing watercolor or watercolor pencils, the paper is the lightest tone that you're going to have on your in your artwork. If I cover over all of the white of the light of the paper, then I will lose all my highlights. So we want to make sure that we give ourselves a reminder for those. You can see that I have a little mark there that I want to take off. I'm just going back with an eraser, and this is a very soft eraser. Be careful if you're using a pencil eraser, because sometimes these can have some lead on them and be kind of harsh and just, kind of create smudge marks. So this is a soft eraser. Here's another soft eraser that I use, this Pentel. I think this has been a Pentel click eraser. Works really good for this. And I'm just making sure that I don't have any lines that are too harsh. Everything looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and start with my watercolor pencils. I'm starting with a red, and you're going to notice that I'll start out by just kind of lightly drawing around my image. I'm not going to press too hard on this. Just giving myself a guide. And I am going to give myself a guide here because this highlight is very important. If I lose that highlight, I lose a lot of the contour of my apple. Notice these highlighted areas, and that's what makes it get that rounded look. I also want to make sure that I have a little bit of a highlight area there, possibly a little one here. And then I'm going to go ahead and do this little dip where the stem comes in. And something that I want to be really careful of is to retain this little, I kind of call it the shoulder of the apple. You notice it's a little lighter in that area all around, and that gives it that sense of shape and form. So I'm going to remind myself by just putting some little light lines to make sure that I retain that light area there. Now, one of the things when we start shading with our pencil to note is that I have these little scratch papers here that I use. If I shade with my pencil by drawing harsh lines like this or sharp lines, later when I go to add my water, I'm going to have a hard time scrubbing those lines out. And the goal is to have as little of those pencil lines as possible. And if you're doing that too much, see, I still see those lines under there. And if I keep scrubbing with my paper, I have a danger of eroding the paper and it starts getting pulpy, or you can even press, rub through the paper. So instead of that, I'm going to do a lot of my shading with the long end of the point, and I'm going to press down. I'm not going to hold it like a pencil. I'm going to hold it like a tool this way, and I'm pressing down with my finger, okay? So another tip is I want to shade within the contour. I'm following the contour of my object because this has a roundedness to it. And if I start just shading straight lines, it's going to lose that sense of roundness. And you'll see that later on when we go ahead and add our our water to activate the color, it will retain a lot of this sense of roundness. Okay, I'm just kind of adding a basic light tone, not pressing too hard, because one of the things about form is that we really need to have some dark areas, some mid-tones, and some light areas. And that's what's going to create that sense of roundedness. So I'm not really pressing too hard on any one area. And if I get some pencil lines, it's okay. Just kind of trying to avoid that if I can. Notice I gave myself a little reminder line here, not too sharp of a line, but just to remind myself, oops, stop when I get there. Coming around this highlighted area, just applying a light coat of that red. I'm going to be going further and adding more. I'm adding darker in some areas, lighter in others, but I just kind of want to cover. I'll be adding other colors as well. Now, looking at our resource photo, you notice that around the stem is some contouring, and by that I mean some curved lines that show that that apple is curving down into that stem area. So in order to get that, I'm going to go ahead to the sharp side of my end of my point, but I'm not going to press too hard. I'm just going to kind of do some swoopy lines coming up like this, some curved lines coming out of that area. Stopping here because I don't want to lose my highlights. Please feel free to turn your paper if it makes it easier for you. I do that all the time. Curving them up and over. You can see I'm already getting a nice drawing with some curved lines. I'm being careful here with that highlight area. In fact, let's see if I can correct a little bit of that by taking off some of that. I can't take it off all of it, but I can take some of it for sure. Okay. Again, those contoured lines. And I will go and add some deeper color in here, but just getting that first coat laid down. Now I want some darker areas for shadows. So see here that I have a shadow under my leaf. I have some shadowing down on the side, and I have a little bit of shadowing around the edges. And again, these are my darkest areas. I'm going to go ahead and put some deeper color here of that same red. Careful, careful not to cover that highlight right there, right? And I'm going to bring it down the side of the apple here with deeper color, leaving this area as a mid-tone. I don't want it too dark. Coming over on this side, laying down some depth. And the other thing that I don't want to do is make it even everywhere like a pattern. So I'm going to kind of vary it a little bit. Some darker coming up here, a little bit of darkness here. Kind of going over this contour area up here, being careful to retain those highlights. I lost this a little bit down here, but I didn't need this highlight too bright down here, just to add a little bit of interest. Now I'm going to come back in with another color. I'm going to come in with my orange, and I'm going to add some orange to some of this area. Where I add it, I like to have it around this rounded part right here. And I'll even be adding a little bit of brown and yellow there as well, because you find that this creates kind of a nice lighter tone that leads up to that major highlight. I come a little bit down here, not too much and not in, all exactly the same, just varying it. Okay, I'm going to come in with my yellow, do the same thing. And by doing this, what we're doing, we're actually blending the colors right on the paper. And you'll see that when we go ahead and activate this with the water, it will show beautifully. Put a little bit of this up here. And with the brown, I just do a very little bit. Not a lot. And then I'm going to do some very light contour lines going the other direction. And you'll find that when we add the water, it kind of adds to the sense of contour. You can already see it developing there. Okay, now I'm going to come back in with my blue. Blue is a great color to add shadowing. I don't usually use black on a paper like this because it can get almost too deep, but you'll notice if I put some shadowing with my blue, when I put the water on, it will kind of activate with the red and kind of create more of like a red shade. Again, I don't want it to be exact in any, exactly the same on each side. Put a little more shadowing on this side, and of course under that leaf where I want it to be a little bit darker. And the other area that I might want it to be a little bit darker is up in here around my stem. I'm using soft lines. Okay. So I'm going to pause on that and I'm going to work on the leaves because I find myself, if I do any too long on any one thing, then I can start overworking it. So to work on the leaf, I'm going to go ahead and take my green. This is my darker green. And I'm going to kind of draw in that leaf, draw around it in order to get the shape. Get this one. Let's take a look at that resource photo. And you can see that we don't want our leaf to just be, like I said, colored in like a color book. We want a variety of colors. I'll probably get the stem in there, pull some of the brown out from the stem, but I'm going to go ahead and start. I want some darks and lights. So I'm going to just start by laying in kind of a little bit of a vein here. And then I want some lines coming out from that vein, like so. And then I'm just going to start kind of adding my color, and you'll see that this will take more of a form when we add the water. It will look much more interesting. Blending around the edges, a little bit of dark here. And I'm leaving some room because I want a couple things in here. I want a little bit of yellow and my lighter green. And I also want a little bit of white showing. So this might be a very highlighted area here. Here's my lighter green. This is my yellow green. So I'm not going to color that entire area in. I'll leave that little bit of white. Come in here. Again, turning my pencil on its side. Going with my yellow, some of these lighter areas. Coming back with my darker green. Get this leaf in here. And as I said, when you do yours, please don't feel like you have to follow and make yours look exactly like mine. I could do the same piece of artwork several times and they never look the same. I'm going to try to clean up this stem just a little bit here. And sometimes what I find with artwork is that when I do make a mistake, it's like a happy accident. It's like, oh, I like how that looked. Or what I think is a mistake sometimes is not a mistake. Okay, coming in with my yellow again here. And what I'll probably do is come back. I'll show you a technique where we can come back and add some detail to these leaves. I'm coming in with my brown now for this stem. And with my stem, let's go ahead and outline it a little bit here so we see where it is. I'm going to paint or color part of it brown and part of it yellow. So again, it'll add that interest. And then with my leaf here, I'm going to have a little bit of that brown stem coming down into the leaf, like that. Maybe even a little bit down into here. Okay. Okay, I'm pausing, looking at my artwork, deciding where I might want to add some more pigment, meaning some more color, so that when I go ahead and add my water, I have a very rich color coming in. Again, I'm preserving those mid-tones here in the middle, lighter tones. Just adding a little bit of color to it. And you'll see that when we do add the water, we can move the color around. Now I'm going to add a little bit of black. Not too much, but just a little bit of black down here to the bottom, so that when I do that shadowing, I do want it to look darker down here, maybe a tiny bit right here. And on this side, not too much. Okay, now let's go ahead and start activating this with water. So I've got a simple watercolor brush. I think this one is a Royal Round, size 8 from Amazon, okay? And I'm gonna start with my apple. Now, one of the tricks that I want to show you, or one of the techniques, is that I really wanna make sure I don't have too much water on my brush. Too much water on my brush, and I go to add it to the paper, and it's going to just blob up with a big bubble and run all over, and I won't be able to control it. So I'm gonna dab my brush on a paper towel. Now, if you wanna practice with this, it's not a bad idea to just get a sense of what your water is going to do. Let me get too much water. See how I just have a lot of water, and that's going to start running around and be hard to control. If I have a little water, less than I think I need, by dabbing it on the paper towel, I can come in here and really have some nice control over that pigment. Because essentially, when I add water, now I have watercolor paint. It's going to activate it, okay? I'm always surprised at how little water I want to have on my brush. So I'm dabbing it on my paper towel, and I always start in my lighter areas first, okay? The reason for that is that if I start in my dark areas and I paint over the light areas, I'm gonna lose all of that nice mid-tone. Now notice I'm gonna have to wash my brush before I go into other areas. And I'm just doing some swooping strokes, moving that color around, respecting those lighter areas. And once I get, now when I come in here to the darks, last thing I want to do is bring this brush up here and start painting the middle. Because if I do that, I'm going to transfer all that dark pigment right up into what I need to be my lighter tone areas. Working first in those light areas, around the outside of the apple here. See how it beautifully activates. This isn't the heaviest watercolor paper, so you'll notice that it does a little bit of buckling, but it will dry and it will be fine. Just getting really careful around this area because that's where I want that nice highlight to exist. One of the things about the pigment, you can always add more, but it's hard to take it away. Coming in here, I just want to, see I got too much on there. Smoothing out. And the thing is too, I don't want to work it too much. Sometimes I kind of let it tell me what it wants to look like, and I go with it. See these darker areas, very gentle. Now, if I want to, if I feel like I've just got too much pigment on there, or too much water, I should say, I can take a paper towel and I can just lightly dab. Never rub, just lightly dab. That's also a nice way to add some highlights. Now, once I get up here into this contour area of the apple, notice I added a few little lines in here, just a little bit to keep it from looking completely too white. And that will dry nicely. And around here I can, again, I'm dabbing some of that color off, or some of that paper off, water off the paper. Okay, I'm gonna smooth out a little bit, and then I'm gonna leave this alone and come back to it with some pigment in a little bit. Smoothing. Let's get to work on those leaves. Start with those lighter areas. If I want to retain that light area of yellow, then I need to really wash my brush before I activate that area, or the next area next to it. Very careful here down the stem, giving that lighter area. Notice how I keep dabbing my brush whenever I feel like I have too much water on there. No two leaves are the same, no two apples are the same, so please don't try to recreate exactly what you see on my paper. And then the stem. I think one of the hardest things about art is knowing when it's enough. Okay. Now I'm gonna just pause for a moment, look at my artwork, see where I might want some more pigment. And the way that I'm gonna add pigment now is not with a pencil, okay? It's going to be with actually creating my own kind of a palette here. So I'm going to grab my red, and I'm gonna just go on that long side of the pencil and get a bunch of that pigment on there. I can do the same thing with my orange. And maybe even my yellow and my brown. And this is giving this area over here a little opportunity to kind of set and dry a little bit. Okay. Now these are my basic apple colors, right? But I have them on a piece of paper instead of scribbling with a pencil, because this paper can't really handle more pencil scribbles and it really won't show. Let me show you. See, a little bit, I guess it does. But I am in danger of damaging my paper, so I'm gonna be careful there. So I'm gonna activate with a little water, pull in my red. This is a great way to do color mixing with watercolor pencils. And from here, I can just use this just like watercolor paint. Get a little bit lighter color for this area here. Now, notice how by adding the different colors, it really, really does help with that look of contouring. A little bit of brown, possibly in these darker areas here. And when I go ahead and blend, I always want to blend with a relatively clean brush, so that I don't push one color into a next that I don't want to. Okay, it's looking pretty good. What I do want is some darkness up in here. So I'm gonna take a little bit of that brown, create a little bit of a shadow effect up here. Maybe even add to the brown. See how I can now paint exactly like it's just watercolor paint? And sometimes I will just let it puddle a little bit so that when it dries, it just kind of adds a little bit of interest. It's totally fine. It's the artist's prerogative. I'm going to add a little bit of darkness right here to just make that contouring effect look a little bit better. And then I'm going to take some of this brown and I'm going to pull it down into my leaves, just with a fine tip of this paintbrush. One of the things about these brushes that are so nice is that they can go down to a very fine tip, just if you press very softly. This way. Okay, now we look like we have an apple that's floating in space. So we're going to come over here with our blue. And remember that line that we created that's like kind of like a horizon line behind it? Again, with the side of the pencil point, not the tip. I'm just layering in some shading here. It could look like it's on a table or a tablecloth. And then since my light would probably be coming from this direction, I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of, just a little bit of black, very little bit, so that my shadow is a little bit darker on this side and underneath. Now, when I go to activate this with water, again, I always start with my lighter areas first. And I'm just doing a very gentle stroke. I don't want to touch that black until I'm ready for it because I will transfer it to every other area. Again, cleaning off my brush, pushing it out. And always blending with a very clean brush. Okay, that's basically it. The only thing remaining would be to be sure and sign your artwork. And again, you'll notice that I've done this several times. It never looks the same twice. If you like the project and you want to try it and practice it some more, you can definitely do that. Some things that I might add to this real quick before we end is that the leaves could use a little bit of a deeper shadowing. In order to create a shadow or a shade of a color, I can just add a little bit of black to that green and then come in here in the areas that I want to be a little bit darker. Okay, and that's basically it. Thank you for joining.